Will democracy survive the next couple of years?
And essentially, we are the same.
And there are so many needs that Minnesota has.
What people are saying they need right now.
Access to Democracy is made possible in part by a donation from Firefly Credit Union. Firefly is the new name of U.S. Federal Credit Union, which has proudly served the financial needs of the greater Twin Cities community since 1925. At Firefly, we guide our members forward and give them the power to chase dreams by delivering the financial solutions they need to get ahead. From checking accounts to mortgages, we'll light the way. We are Firefly Credit Union, and this is life illuminated. By Thomson Reuters, providing legal professionals with intelligence, technology, and human expertise they need to find trusted answers. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And Dr. Charles Crutchfield of award-winning Crutchfield Dermatology in Eagan. Acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians, a Minnesota native who trained at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Crutchfield personally treats all patients and states that experience counts and quality matters. Crutchfield Dermatology, look good, feel great, with beautiful skin.
Welcome. Access to Democracy returns. Alan Miller with you. And I guess I could say, as usual, as we tread toward 20 years, or I think have tread on 20 years now, we have a first-time guest. Very interesting young man, because he's interested in history. And what young man is both a journalist and interested in history? Well, Nick Woltman is such, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So you work with the Pioneer Press.
Right.
We've had quite a few people from the press on the show over the years. And I should mention that we have a guest in studio. Andy Rogers is here from Sun This Week. And welcome, Andy. You can't see him, but he's here. And they're doing a feature on us based on our 20 years, which we greatly appreciate. And give us a little background.
On me?
On you. I know mine. It's really boring.
Well, I have worked at the Pioneer Press for about 6.5 years, almost 7 years, and I started out as a business reporter. And we eventually, I migrated over to the breaking news team, and when I wasn't reporting on breaking news, I started working on some local history stuff that I was just interested in. I've always been a big history nerd, so whenever I got a free minute, I would go and look at microfilm or look through photos, and eventually started a blog called From the Archives, and that sort of grew into now a newsletter and a weekly photo feature in the paper, and some magazines that we've done as quarterly or so inserts.
Yeah, we're going to talk about those in a few minutes. But interesting enough that a young man such as yourself is interested in history and background. Where did that come from?
Well, I've always been a big fan of history. My major in college was history. I initially thought I was going to be an archaeologist, but when I found out that...
I'm talking about history,
right, yeah.
Ancient history.
Ancient history. Right. But when I found out that it wasn't really very much like Indiana Jones, I sort of lost interest and started working for the student paper, and that's how I sort of fell into journalism.
It's funny because I started out in journalism also.
Did you?
And yeah.
You still do journalism.
I fell off the wagon in several ways, but never would have imagined that I'd be here today. And
for 20 years.
Yeah, doing this for 20 years, yeah. So you gravitated from college to Bismarck?
Yeah,
North Dakota?
My first job out of college was as a copy editor at the Bismarck Tribune in North Dakota.
And
then, well, I got married, and my wife got a job in St. Paul, so that meant that I also moved to St. Paul.
The director's telling me to stop you from moving your seat back and
I'm sorry.
forth. I get hand signals. And you've been with the Pioneer Press, what'd you say, 6.5 years?
Yeah, about 6.5 years. Yeah.
How did you come to these special sections? And it was interesting that this one that I'm holding up came out just today, and I think we have some close-ups of them, so we'll go to the close-ups. But how did you get involved in that?
Well, this was an idea, I'm actually not really sure where the idea came from, but they wanted to do one on beer and the local brewing industry. This is when the taproom bill had recently passed in the legislature, and breweries were starting to sort of have a moment, and they wanted to do something about beer and the brewing industry, and I volunteered to do some history of the brewing industry in St. Paul for that magazine, and it turned into a lot of history on the brewing industry in St. Paul, because St. Paul has kind of a rich brewing
It sure
history.
does, yeah.
So that first one that we did was well received, and people seemed to like it, and so we ended up doing another. The next few of them were about history. We've also done them on different subjects. We've done them on products that are made in the East Metro, the Twin Cities, called Things We Make.
We've done one on the history of the Pioneer Press, really.
Kind of, yeah. We did one called From the Archives, which is
Which is the oldest newspaper of its kind, really, in the state.
That's right, yeah, 170 years.
And we're going to talk about the fading world of journalism, which
Hope it's not really fading.
bothers me no end. Well, we see that, conglomerates are buying up papers,
That's true,
and so we'll talk about that in a few moments. So you started doing these, well received,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden, as I say, you're a journalist historian.
Yeah, I happily accept that designation. They kind of, evolved into primarily history related magazines, but we have done some other ones, but primarily history.
Your editor is a favorite of ours, and he's an individual who has unselfishly given of himself, Mike Burback, over the years to come in here. And it's been great to talk about journalism and what's happening in the journalistic world with him.
Yeah, I know he always enjoys coming on to.
We've had other journalists on, and we've had a lot of local authors lately, and it's amazing in the Twin Cities, the talent that we have in terms of people who are well-received authors nationally, but live here,
Yeah, we're very spoiled here.
They all came for the weather, I understand, but well, that's what I'm told. But in any event, so you're still with your wife and 2 cats in St. Paul.
That's correct,
I know
yep.
that, and still with the Pioneer Press. And, where do we go from here?
Well, we haven't really decided on what we'll do next with these, but we did recently launch an email newsletter called From the Archives, so I'm able to every week give people a little St. Paul history in their inbox, and the weekly photo feature is obviously continuing. I hope we get to do more of these magazines with the historical theme.
Well, let's talk about some of them. I'm going to hold up snapshots now from the 20th century, and I think we have a close-up of that one in the control room, so we don't have to look at what I'm doing here. There we go.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit of the background on this one.
Well, so we have about more than 100 years worth of photos at the Pioneer Press. Our archive spans really the 20th century and now obviously the 21st century. And we had struck a deal with a company that was going to scan all of them for us, and they took the photos and down to, I think, Arkansas, and we didn't see them for a while. And eventually that deal fell through, and we got the photos back I want to say a year or 2 ago, and we thought, since we've got these photos again, we should do something kind of fun with them, and we decided to put together not exactly a greatest hits, but sort of a photo album of mostly the East Metro, the Twin Cities, which is our primary coverage area. Sort of a little pictorial history
Some
of
of
the 20th century.
the gangster history of
Yeah.
St. Paul, and of which a lot of people aren't aware that it really was a gangster-ridden
It was.
city
Yeah.
for a number of years, with names that people would recognize.
Yeah, John
whether-
Dillinger, Alvin Karpus. There were a lot of Kid Can, a lot of really well-known local, the ne'er-do-wells.
There's a story that the underground tunnel that goes from one of the buildings led to a brothel.
Oh yeah,
That's,
the Minnesota Club on Kellogg. There was, I don't know that it's true. I know that this was, I think that Larry Millette might have debunked this back a few years ago, but there was a story that there was a tunnel from the Minnesota Club where the upper crust of St. Paul would go to have dinner to Nina Clifford's brothel down on the upper landing area, so that they could excuse themselves to go to the bathroom and then make a trip to the brothel and come back to dinner.
even if it's not true,
Even if it's not true, it's a great
an interesting
story,
story. Yeah. And so you did another special on really this one here from the archives, a little bit of everything in terms of the war or wars that we always seem to be in.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about this one.
So that one is, this year is our 170th anniversary. So we were founded in April of 1849. And for our 170th birthday, we decided
There it is up there now.
Oh yeah. We decided to put together a sort of a scrapbook of all of the, not all of, but a lot of the more noteworthy front pages and images from the past 170 years. So that was a lot of fun to work on.
How long does it take you to do something like that?
Ideally, I get 2 to 3 months to work on them, sometimes less. The State Fair one that we just put together was less because we wanted it to coincide with the State Fair. But usually I'll get 2 or 3 weeks that I'll be able to devote solely to one of these magazines, and then in my free time, otherwise, I'm a general assignment reporter in the evenings. So whenever I had a free moment, I would do a little work on these.
So if it's a quiet day, you can do a lot of work on it, and
Exactly.
if it's a busy day, you're out at the latest murder or whatever is going on, bank robbery, etc.
Prefer the quiet days to the murders, yeah.
Personal interest. Well, this one about the State Fair, which just opened yesterday,
Right.
was in our Pioneer Press this morning, and I think we have a clip of it also in there, which I'm holding up here, but we can't see too much here, but if we can, there we are, State Fair snapshots. And it's interesting, you broke it down into different categories.
Yeah.
And I always think of the State Fair here as food.
Yeah.
And
That was
I
a
think
big one.
A
That was a
lot of
big
people
category.
do. I mean, supposedly they have 31 new foods this
Yeah.
year, and I couldn't believe it, because when I saw some of the titles of some of the foods, I couldn't believe that either.
Yeah,
But,
2 of our reporters were there yesterday trying every single one of them, which is...
and they're probably both out sick today.
Yeah,
But,
hopefully they take a personal day after that. Yeah, that's heroic in itself. But yeah, the categories sort of were obvious when we went through the... all of our photos are divided up into folders where you've got a category and then a decade. So State Fair 1910, State Fair 1920, when we go through them, and we saw that every year there was a handful of different types of photos that our photographers would take every single year, and they were either food related or ride related or crying kids or these obvious categories. So we broke the magazine down into those same categories.
And the slide, which is the infamous slide at the State Fair, which
is also having an
everybody has to
anniversary
try
this
the
year.
slide.
Yeah.
Apparently,
It's 50 years old this year.
well, the State Fair here competes really with only two other fairs in the country, as far as I am concerned, and that's the Texas State Fair, a state that's much bigger than we are and has a fair open longer than we do here, and the New York State Fair, which is held in Syracuse, right outside of Syracuse, where I spent 7 years in school, and I was a slow learner, but in college and law school, and it's at lunch today we were talking about state fairs, and the people that we were with were talking about most state fairs are just carnivals. But these three states have state fairs that are just a little bit of everything: agriculture, progress, engineering, electrical, whatever, as well as the animals.
Yeah.
And it's a unique state fair. It's over 2 million people went last year, so that has to say something about it.
Yeah, we really punch above our weight. It was interesting to learn about the evolution of the state fair from what was purely an agricultural get-together for farmers to learn about the latest crop strains and compare their yields, turned into more of a carnival and more of attracting a wider audience.
All the TV stations have really booths, or even larger than booths, barns at the state fair, and they operate for 10 days or whatever the fair is. I think it's 10 days it's open. I'm not sure.
That's 12 days now. Yeah.
12 days. And they operate from there.
Yeah,
I mean,
they're
all
live
the local
broadcasts.
TV.
Yep.
Yeah. So I assume you have a couple of projects in the works right now.
Well, we haven't decided on what to do next. We just finished up the State Fair one a couple of weeks ago. We've kicked around a few ideas that we'd like to do something more with the photos, because we still, obviously these are each 48 pages. We can only fit so many photos in there, so we'd like to use them for that purpose in the future too. But yeah, if anybody has any suggestions, we'd love to hear them.
Well, there are many roads yet to explore in that regard, even though you've done how many of these now?
I want to say 12. Not all of them history related, but 12 or 14.
So, newspapers are really having a tough time. Weeklies seem to be doing better than daily papers right now in the country. A lot of people are getting more of their information, particularly their local information, from we're not allowed to have bugs in here, so I don't know how this guy got in here. He may be a spy. Really, their local information from weekly newspapers. And, I'm going to take a swing at them and see what we can do. It's not quite live television, folks, but it's close. And the control room thinks that's pretty funny. In any event, papers are struggling, daily papers, all of them, from the New York Times, which to me is the bellwether of all papers, down to local. And I know the Pioneer Press has had struggles also, and papers have been bought up. Actually, the Star Tribune used to be the Star and the Tribune, and now it's the Star Tribune.
Yeah, they merged in the 80s, I believe.
Yeah, I actually was a copy boy for the Morning Tribune for one summer. Yeah,
that's awesome.
And a very interesting summer, but they couldn't make it in terms of 2 papers, so it became 1, and we see that. How do you think that affects our society as people seem to rely more and more on television for their news, or their handheld for their news? And I'm from that old school that I like to have that paper in my hand. I like to be able to flip back 2 pages to go back to something that I'm not sure that I got right the first time.
Sure.
How is that impacting our society?
Well, I would say probably not in any good ways, but you know, I think you have seen a lot of innovation, even though there have been challenges. So I think despite the decline in print readership, the growth in online audiences has been really promising. And if the people whose job it is to make money from newspapers, which is above my pay grade, but if they can figure out a way to monetize online traffic.
I was going to say, how does that translate into dollars, though?
Yeah, advertising online doesn't really compare with advertising in print in terms of.
You open the paper and there's a full-page ad from, say, Total Wines, which has
Right,
become
right.
very big, and that doesn't show up nearly as well online.
No, I think you're talking about like dollars versus pennies online. But online subscriptions, I think, have been a promising path forward for a lot of newspapers. I know that the Wall Street Journal has been doing that for, probably since the beginning of their website, and they've had a lot of success with it. The New York Times obviously having success with it, and we a year or 2 ago also put a paywall in place, so we've been also trying to dip our toe in that.
But again, weekly papers have burgeoned during this period of time, even though some of them have been bought up. Now we have the Sun this week and the Dakota Tribune, and those are conglomerates that are really owned by some corporate entity someplace, but more and more people are relying on their news from the local papers.
Sure. Yeah.
And I don't know, I guess that's a good thing. At least people
Yeah.
are reading and staying in touch with their local community.
Yeah, definitely.
Which is, it's one of the things that started us up here with this, is that it gave people a chance to see individuals locally and every once in a while nationally on a more expansive scale, 30 minutes or 28 minutes as we have. It gives you an opportunity to get the feel of a person a lot more than a 30-second soundbite or a 10-second soundbite and things like that. So
You can go a little bit more
that's.
deeply.
But again, if we didn't have our benefactors and if we didn't have Thomson Reuters and the city of Eagan, we wouldn't have this today.
Yeah,
And,
journalism is expensive.
It has become an expense, and it's a big expense, and it also takes a lot out of your life to get prepared for it, to find the subjects not as difficult today as it was in the beginning.
Sure.
when I call people up and I say, this is Access to Democracy, and who are you and what do you want? As opposed to today where we're in 29 cities and we actually, our shows are booked, I think, through October right now.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And
great.
we've had a spin-off. We've had certainly Behind the Game, which is a show about sports, which spun off from us, and Sharon and I still produce it, but we have 2 very talented people who run that show and host that show, and it's a whole different world.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of attack, particularly, and I don't want to get too political, although I'm happy to at any given moment, on the First Amendment and freedom of speech. And we've had a lot of difficulties. Where do you draw the line? What is freedom of speech and what should be censored? How do you look at that with things like Facebook and some of the online commodities that are available.
No, I think social media companies are really wrestling with that right now. I mean, especially Facebook. They just yesterday, I think, announced that they pulled a whole company's advertising off of their platform because it wasn't following their rules. So they're definitely taking steps to be more proactive about regulating what is allowed on their platforms. Twitter is doing the same thing. Yeah, that's
The fine line between freedom of speech and false speech.
right. Yeah, I mean, I think that they've really cracked down on people using their real identities. Like, you have to, prove who you are before you're able to start an account. And yeah, the intentionally misleading Facebook pages and websites and Twitter accounts have had a harder time breaking through lately.
Well, we have, for instance, the allegation that Russia was very, to me it's more than an allegation. I think that there's proof that Russia was very involved in our last presidential election with some false and misinformation and misleading. They throw it up on the web, and people who unfortunately rely on just that for their news believe it. And that's a real danger to me.
Oh, yeah.
But where you draw the line between what is and what is permissible is also, really a tough question. And
Sure.
I know that much smarter people than I are wrestling with it now.
Definitely, yeah. They pay those people a lot of money at Facebook.
And so, what do you see down the road for your future?
Well, I would love to do this kind of thing for the rest of my career. I mean, this is, the right mix of journalism and history. So I really enjoy it a lot. I'd like to keep doing it.
And have you been to Washington? Have you sampled some of the things?
As a tourist, yeah.
Yeah. It's, no, that's good. And how are your two cats? How do they do in terms of newspapers?
They like to interrupt the reading of newspapers. I think that that's their favorite, favorite part of the newspaper experience is interrupting it.
Well, actually,
They're not
we've
big
used up
readers.
the bulk of our time here. If you have any words of wisdom that you could impart to viewers in terms of journalism, in terms of the Fourth Estate, in terms of the press and freedom of the press, what would that be?
Well, I guess I would just like everybody to know that the journalists who are still around doing work right now are, working harder than ever to do their job and do it well. And it's not a particularly easy time to be in journalism, but it's definitely a very rewarding time to be in journalism. And I hope that people are, patient with the transition from print to digital, and just continue reading.
Nick Woltman of the Pioneer Press, we thank you very much.
No, thank you for having me on.